Well, let's get an analysis now on Africa's democracy in 2015. Nanjala Nyabola is joining me now here in Nairobi with more on that. Nanjala, thank you. Now, African democracy, African politics, and African countries generally took a different path in 2015. What would you say were the key highlights for you?
Well, you're absolutely right. It's been a very mixed bag, I think, for democracy in Africa in 2015. I think we've seen a couple of bright lights. What stands out for me is Burkina Faso. I think that was one example of the really good things that are possible when a nation is able to take responsibility for the democratic process in their own country, within their own borders. I think it was very unprecedented that we had a relatively peaceful transition from a 27-year dictatorship to a very successful election earlier this month. And it's still very early to tell how Burkina Faso is going to go, but all the signs that we're seeing right now are very encouraging.
Well, of course, we're looking at some of the issues, contentious issues that came up in 2015. The whole question of presidential term limits was quite a highlight in 2015. What were some of the concerns that stood out for you, and how do you think Africa should be addressing that in 2016?
I think the question of presidential term limits has really raised a very important challenge in how we understand governance and how we understand democracy, as you've mentioned. It's very interesting that some leaders have resorted all the way to the use of force, as you've seen in Burundi, and you've seen also, somewhat relatively peaceful methods used in Rwanda. But all in all, the question of leaders trying to extend their terms beyond what is in the Constitution is actually a very problematic one. And it's not so much, President Kagame has gone on record as giving very elaborate arguments as to how, European countries don't have term limits. Why should African countries have these imposed on them? But really what it is that we are at a different stage. A lot of African countries are at a different stage in their political development. And a lot of countries don't have the political stability that is necessary in order to, say, be at peace with a president extending his terms, his access to power indefinitely. And so there's a lot of really important questions that I think a lot of African societies have to ask for themselves. We have a referendum, I think, on the cards in the Democratic Republic of Congo on the same issue. And that is a country that has known some of the worst levels of political instability that we've seen, not just in Africa, but globally. Do we really want to enter a stage where a person can have absolute power in a nation that is still very politically fragile, is still very socially fragile, and, President Kabila has demonstrated that he's not above resorting to the use of force. He's not above, clamping down on human rights activists, on youth democracy activists like the Balai Citoyen individuals. And I think that really sets a dangerous tone and a dangerous precedent.
All right, Nanjala Nyabola, thank you very much for your insights there on Africa's politics and democracy in 2015.